Just so cameras. Okay, all right, so let me get back to where I was. All right, so for the second part here, we're going to talk about Moses a little bit, one of my favorite Bible characters. Deuteronomy 34, verses 1 through 3. And Moses went up from the plains of Moab unto the mountain of Nebo to the top of Pisgah, that is, over against Jericho. The Lord showed him all the land of Gilead and unto Dan, and all Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah, unto the utmost sea, and the south and the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, unto Zoar. And the Lord said unto him, This is the land which I swear unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, saying, I will give it unto your seed. I have caused thee to see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not go over thither. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, over against Beth Peor. But no man knows of his sepulchre unto this day. Verse 7 says, And Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. When Moses died at 120 years old, he still could see well, and he had the strength. In fact, he climbed a mountain to die, basically. So he was as strong as ever. The Bible is making it clear that Moses had his strength, that he lived a long life, and he still had strength. And the question, as we continue to look at the pandemic and its impact, the two questions, the question really is, how did Moses live so long and healthy? What did Moses do? What does the Bible give as hints that Moses did to live such a long, healthy life? If you understand this, you'll understand, I believe, how to deal with this pandemic, and in general, how to live a long, healthy life. I think Moses gives a lot of the information, and his life is an example. So I'll ask this question: did Moses have a stressful life? Yes. Absolutely. Listen, I would never want to trade places with poor Moses. He had to deal with the children of Israel. They were knuckleheaded, stiff-necked. They challenged him. Everybody's like, oh, I want to go back to Egypt. You know what I'm saying? They go ahead. I could really have said that somewhere along the way. You want to go back, go ahead. But Moses didn't. In fact, even when there was a threat, when God said, listen, after they make a golden calf, remember, and God said, listen, I will destroy them and make of you a seed. I will make a great nation out of you. But Moses said, hey, don't do that. Don't let the Egyptians say you released us from captivity just to destroy us in the wilderness. He said, don't do that. He said, don't make it. He said, don't. He said, keep them, Moses said, and blot me out of the book. God said, no, I'm only blotting the people out of the book that sinned. I'm not blotting you out of the book, you didn't sin. And Moses stood in the gap for the children of Israel time and time and again. This is why in some ways he's a type of Christ, right? And the antitype is Christ, who literally stands in the gap and says, I will die so they can live. Powerful, the lesson that you get from that. But Moses was stressed. I shouldn't say he was stressed out. He dealt with stress. His siblings, when he married who he married, his siblings were upset about it, talking behind his back. He went through it from all sides. But Moses somehow managed to stay healthy, managed to live a long life, and managed to stay strong. He didn't just survive, he thrived. And that's what we want to look at. So I normally put this as the last part of what I talk about, but I want to start with he trusted in God. Because I want you to realize that what the devil wants to do now is erode our trust in God. That is the real thing the devil wants to do. So I just want to, before we get deep into this now, let's just say a word of prayer and then we're going to get into the second half of this. Father God, we thank you for this opportunity to study a word, to study current events and prophecy, as well as our health message. So Lord, I ask that you just make me a nail on the wall, Lord. A rusty, sorry nail. But upon this nail, Lord, I ask that you hang a portrait of Jesus Christ. Let me not be seen or heard today, Lord. Instead, let us hear a word from the throne room of grace. It's our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So I want to go to some of the things that are happening today that are eroding people's trust in God. And I want to start with social media. And I want to read what is being said about social media now. So research reported on childmind.org, as well as many other sources, shows that heavy social media use has been linked to increased depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem among children. It prevents the development of some social skills and direct communication skills. Wow. Now, this is not a Christian site. It's not, a health message. This is the world looking at social media and saying, this is what it can cause. Why might social media cause depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem in young people? They're not getting exposure. So one, the insulation. When I was growing up, I had to deal with bullies. And not online, they were real bullies. In my face, wanting to fight, calling me names, and I had to learn to deal with it. Now, was it the healthiest thing? I don't know, but I had to deal with it. And so today, when I run into people who want to be bullies, I can manage with it. I don't theoretically overreact, but you get my point. If you're insulated, however, and then someone is negative towards you, you may actually be more sensitive towards it. But of course, social media isn't just that. It portrays people in a way that is simply not realistic. People don't take their worst pictures and put on social media. They put their best pictures on. They don't show you when the social media picture when they're not doing well in life. They wait till they saved up money for 4 years and wind up in Barbados and they're on the beach acting like they're a baller, like they can afford to go to Barbados every other weekend. Right? They pose in front of other people's cars. And so if your child is sitting at home thinking, man, I'm missing out. I don't have this life. I'm not as pretty as this girl. She doesn't realize the young lady has already done all kinds of stuff. Some of them even plastic surgery, makeup artists. They have special lenses they can modify. And you're sitting there thinking, wow, I'm not attractive because the Kardashians are so attractive. Are they? Not so sure. Go back and look at them back in the mid-'80s. They were just regular people like everybody else. A lot of stuff has been done between them now and then. And I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying, if you're a child and you're looking at this, everyone looks wealthy, everyone looks perfectly built, everyone looks perfectly attractive, and you start thinking something's wrong with me. Social media destroys self-esteem. I don't have these slides today, but one of the great stressors you can have is loneliness and lack of self-esteem. They both cause chronic stress, which is one of the reasons young people are dealing with so much stress today, because many of them are suffering from loneliness. They don't have the friendship attachments many of us had when we were kids, because we spent most of our day outside. I could not stand being inside until it got super cold, then I was happy to come back inside. But most of the year, even in the cold, I did like to go out and throw some snowballs around, and I had to go shovel snow, and we played football every chance we ever got, even snow, but it didn't matter what it was. And we built friendships with people, right? So we didn't have that loneliness. We didn't have cell phones, but people didn't call our house. One of our friends, we got up, went outside, and knocked on the door, and said, can Tommy come outside and play? That changes the way you see the world. That's part of it. But the low self-esteem is really dangerous. The idea that unless you look perfectly matched to today's standards of beauty is one of the things that is destructive to children. And that's one of the reasons the social media can be dangerous. Preteens and teens spend more time connecting on social media instead of building social skills and having conversations in person. Therefore, they are not learning how to read body language, facial expressions, or vocal inflections. Social media may also become a major distraction that leads to a lack of sleep and poor academic performance. If not, technology use is not monitored, if it is unmonitored, kids may stay up late without their parents realize they are not asleep. Ultimately, it is difficult for kids to unplug from technology at all times of the day. So, what are some of the things you can take from that in the middle of a pandemic? One, if you don't sleep, your immune system does not reload. Two things happen when you sleep that are critical, which is one of the reasons that rest is one of the pillars of the health message and the laws of health. When you sleep, that is when your body actually reboots its immune system. If you don't sleep, you have no immune system. And what we're finding is that if you're exposed to screen time right up to when you sleep, it damages the quality of sleep you get. So if the kid is sneaking their iPad or their cell phone under the covers, and while everyone else in the house is asleep, this kid is on there and the blue light from that screen is in their face, they're not going to get this thing called sleep. And the other thing that happens when you sleep is not going to happen, which is memory. Never forget that. You remember when you sleep. You don't remember when you take the information in. It's when you sleep that the brain takes the information and stores it where you can retrieve it later on. The best students, there's a correlation. My wife and I have been studying research lately. There's a correlation between the amount of hours of sleep you get and how well you do in school. Because as when you sleep, so even if you don't study as hard, but you always get enough sleep, your ability to remember a random odd fact in general is going to be better than a person who didn't sleep. All right, let me go. I gotta go another level lower now. So when we look at end time deception and the need to be able to recall scripture and principles and doctrines, if you have not slept well, and you're challenged on what you believe, will you be able to mount a defense? Your spiritual immunity also needs you to rest. Again, we go back to the Sabbath. The last sermon I preached at our church was on the table of showbread. There's a reason that the group that baked the bread only brought it in on the Sabbath. It signifies the fact that you have to re-up, and in a preset, eat all the leftover bread from the week before. In the holy place. We are spiritually supposed to re-up, reboot. Our immune system spiritually is the Word of God. In Ephesians 6, when it talks about the armor of God, what is the only offensive weapon? The sword of the Word. That's your immune system. That's what attacks the devil's back. That's why when the devil comes at Jesus, he says, it is written. If you don't sleep, spiritually you put yourself in a bad place. Physically you put yourself in a bad place. Psychologically you put yourself in a bad place. And these kids have a hard time unplugging. They do worse in school and all of these different things. Now, I'm going to talk about sugar later on. I may have this slide again later on, but all right, that's fine. I'll show you. All right, so sugar. So, one of the things that is dangerous to the minds of young people is also sugar. So, when we look at Moses, going back to why did Moses do so well, Moses probably, outside of the 40 years he was in Egypt, and even then probably unlikely because of the technology at the time, he never ate sugar separated from fiber. I want you to think about that for a second. To eat sugar separated from fiber was almost impossible in those days. So what does sugar do? Well, these are different names for it. So the manufacturers are quite sophisticated, and they have figured out that they can put more sugar in your food if they just give it a lot of different names. And the one part of sugar that's most dangerous is that word right there, fructose, which is literally what honey is actually. Honey is fructose, but I'll come back to honey in a second. Sugar not so nice for your child's brain development, the study suggests. New research has shown in a rodent model that daily consumption of sugar sweetened beverages during adolescence impairs performance on a learning and memory tasks during adulthood. The group further shows that changes in the bacteria in the gut may be the key to sugar-induced memory impairment. I'm not going to have time to get into the gut microbiome and this whole new organ that we basically discovered in the human body, which is foreign to us, which is the bacteria that line our gut. We didn't even know about this when I was in medical school. It's relatively new in the 2000s. But there are good and bad bacteria that line your gut. If you eat a certain diet, you will selectively feed one or the other. A bad diet selectively feeds bad bacteria. The bad bacteria breaks down the barrier between the gut wall and the blood, and so toxins are able to seep in. Inflammatory components can seep in. Some of the bacteria themselves produce the toxins, and so you will get sicker. And some are arguing that this is partly how Alzheimer's happens and other things. What we do know is that when, and I'll show you more in a second, when these toxins cross in and cause inflammation, they get to the brain, then it can cross the blood-brain barrier and cause inflammation and disease in the brain, which is why sugar probably negatively affects brain development. People say, this child, as an example, seems to not be as mature as they should be for their age, or you're comparing them to other generations of them. Other generations, up until the 60s of last century, didn't eat sugar the way we do. This is a new phenomenon in human history to consume sugar separated from fiber, something Moses did not do. But one of the first things you can do to completely change your health is to find where your diet is sugar hidden and remove it. When Subway sandwiches, you all know Subway sandwiches, they are basically ubiquitous. And a lot of people eat it because they think they're healthy. But when they went to Ireland to set up shop and open franchises, when the Irish equivalent of the FDA or their health department went over the Subway sandwich bread, you know what they said? You cannot register this in our country as bread. It must be registered as cake because there's so much sugar in the bread. Isn't that crazy? So when we think about sugar, you don't think if you go to Subway and buy a whole grain, 7-grain bread, there's going to be sugar in it. There is. So you're exposed to so much sugar. So before we talk about all the other things we talk about, you have to really look at what is our sugar consumption like and what does it actually do to us. We're going to come back to sugar later on. Right now, I want to jump to this. And I didn't get a chance to put these in, but I'll just say it here. One of the big challenges of the pandemic has been what we call the diseases of despair. Suicide, drug overdose, alcohol and fatty liver disease, and a few other such diseases, right? We have found that when the churches were shut down last year in the lockdown, you all remember we all had to stay home? I got to know all my neighbors. All we did was walk around in our neighborhood. I was like, oh, finally got to know everybody because we were all walking. But what they didn't shut down were the alcohol stores. In fact, alcohol was considered an essential industry, an essential product. You remember that? So the churches were closed, but the liquor stores were open. And I've had colleagues tell me that they drank their way through that first 3-4 month lockdown. Bottles and bottles of wine. Those are the diseases of the spirit. We'll come back to alcohol in a second and talk about what it does. But one of them is suicide. And suicide rates among teenagers has been high. Social media giants are told they have a duty to tackle it because social media is how it happens. And I'll give you a brief testimony from our family. say this because I'm hoping it will help somebody else's family. One of my 13-year-old little cousins committed suicide in her own bathroom. Her mother found her hanging in the bathroom. She was on the phone with someone first, and we believe there was a strong social media connection where someone coached her as to how to tie the knot and put the thing in the bathroom. She was being bullied online, and there were some other things going on. I won't get all the way into it, but I want to submit to you that this is tangible and real. And when it hit our family, it was devastating. I had to go to Miami to do a eulogy. And it's just darkness. It's different from any funeral I've ever done. It's just darkness at what happened, the impact on the siblings, that it was just devastating. And this is real, and one of the things churches need to talk about is when kids get into trouble, we have to have a way for them to talk to someone without being judgmental. They need a free space in this arena so that kids can talk about it, because it's happening. And it's not just here in America. This British professor says teenage suicide is on the rise. The danger is that we are presiding over a suicidal generation of young people, and that young people have learned self-harm as a way of coping. They cut themselves. I've seen these patients, they cut themselves. And I asked one young lady, why are you cutting yourself? She said, because it makes me feel something. Maybe you should take up a sport or something. And try something else. This is a scary way to feel something. And there's a lot more I can get into that, but it's a global phenomenon, mostly in the Western world. Suicide rates because teens and young adults are highest on record. So we are seeing this as part of what is actually happening in our country. And it dovetails into addiction, right? What happens to people? This stress level, the loneliness, the loss that the pandemic gave a lot of people. All of a sudden you couldn't go out, you couldn't go to school. The virus, so we talked a lot about the virus in the first half. Also, the ways that we mitigate the virus have their own side effects as well, don't they? Right? If you lock the whole country down, Australia's basically been in lockdown for months. They don't have a lot of cases, but nobody goes outside, and you won't have a lot of cases. So it has its impact. When you take kids and sit them at home on a screen to do school rather than going to school, it has an impact. Everything has an impact. It's life. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Law of physics. It applies to much of life. Especially now, imagine the poorer kids, poor inner city kids, often of ethnic minorities, rural white kids who come from poor homes and they don't have good access to internet. Imagine what happens now when they're trying to navigate all that. This was incredibly stressful. What we found is that the rates of opioid overdoses went up during the pandemic. It went up, and was it already high? Absolutely. We were already in the middle of an opioid epidemic, which was started, this is not a conspiracy theory, this is fact, by one of the drug companies that just went out of business. It was filed bankruptcy over how they marketed and pushed one of the drugs, and to some extent, even the Joint Commission that is who regulates hospitals, when they said that the pain must be the fifth vital sign, you don't treat pain well, your hospital's gonna be cited, the doctor's gonna be cited, and guess what everybody started doing? They started writing these meds willy-nilly. The pharmaceutical companies actually assisted in this, to push this, to sell more pain medicines, and it has created a massive problem around addiction. It is not, I won't even write these medications because most people aren't, you don't know what's going on. You take them and sell them on the street, it's a value. So this is part of what happened. The addiction happened. And let's talk about alcohol first. And when we talk about alcohol as Adventists, a lot of times we talk about it off of our back heel, like we're on the defensive. Because people come at us, I remember having a debate with a nun, and I have no idea how I got into this discussion with a nun, but I did. And the nun was arguing with me that there's nothing wrong with drinking alcohol. I got some weird arguments. I probably was on a plane. And I said to her, no, the Bible is against alcohol. She said, Paul says a little wine for the stomach's sake. And then she referred, there's another place in the scripture that she went to around alcohol. And I went to the Nazarite vow and Samson and other places. But the scripture that I always go to, besides the one that says, wine is a mocker and strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereof is not wise, as Solomon says, is this one. It is from Proverbs 23, and it's one that you should always remember as to what the Bible definitively says about alcohol. And here it is. Proverbs 23, verse 31 says, look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it gives its color in the cup, when it moves itself aright. At the last, it bites like a serpent, and it does what? It stings like an adder. What does alcohol do? Well, the first 31 is describing a chemical process. What is the process that takes grape juice and turns it into wine, alcohol? Fermentation. Verse 31 is describing the process of fermentation. Verse 32 is telling you what happens once it has fermented. Now, when you go to verse 33, it says, thine eyes shall behold strange women, and your heart shall utter perverse things. Yea, thou shalt be as he that lies down in the midst of the sea, or as he that lieth upon the top of the mast. They have stricken me, you will say, and I was not sick. They have beaten me, and I felt it not. When I shall awake, I will do what? I will seek it yet again. This is speaking, the Bible describing addiction. Isn't that powerful? You got beat up, you wound up with the wrong woman, but that's what the first verse up there is saying. Thine eyes shall behold strange women. Right? Some of y'all get this because you're old enough to get this one. But I always used to say when I reference this verse, when a guy comes into a bar, he wants to buy a woman a drink. And the reason most guys want to buy a woman a drink is because the guy knows that the more she drinks, by default, the less inhibited she will be. Right? Alcohol blocks the release of a chemical in the brain called GABA. The less inhibited she'll be. He will go from looking like Flavor Flav to looking like Denzel Washington. So, sometimes the crowd's too dumb, they don't get either one of them. I figure somebody that might get that. In other words, alcohol can change your worldview, and you will do things under its influence you would never do sober. I used to be the medical director for the prisons for Orange County, California. All 5 prisons, juvenile prison, the women's prison, men's prison. I can tell you, and it's the jails, not the prison, the jails, the county. I can tell you the jails and the prisons are full of people who alcohol disinhibited, and they went out and committed crimes, violence, and other acts that landed them in prison that they otherwise might have had the sense not to do. Solomon says all this out. You get into a fight. I remember having some friends that would fight. They got drunk. They would want to fight. And if you were around them and they got to fight, you have to help them fight. You have to try to drag them away, or at least you'll leave your boy there. And as soon as the alcohol wears off, what do they want to do? They're ready to go drink again. That's the hallmark of addiction. You get the DUI, it's not enough. You get the DUI and you still want to go get drunk even after you got the DUI. What does it really do to you? Well, alcohol messes with the kidneys, it messes with the liver, causes cirrhosis, it damages the brain, causes chronic heart failure. Alcohol is insidious. It is a known carcinogen. In fact, recently, and I should have put the slide in this deck, recently it came out that there is no safe level of alcohol. Did you guys see that in the news? So all this time I tell you, 1 glass of wine a day is good for you, and then now we're saying, you know what, actually the science says there is no safe level. It is a poison. 1 glass of wine is enough to significantly increase a woman's risk of breast cancer. 1 glass of wine a day. So we now say there's no safe level because of what it does to long-term brain function and the risk of dementia. So ironically, the churches were closed when the pandemic hit, but the liquor stores were open. All right? Study finds alcohol dampens brain waves associated with decision making but not motor control. It decreases in theta waves in the brain, which helps you to be alert and make good decisions. It affects both GABA, the inhibiting neurochemical in the brain, as well as glutamate, the excitatory neurochemical in the brain. It affects both sides of it. It dampens brainwaves. So what happens when you drink alcohol is you are disinhibited. You will make foolish, stupid decisions. And it is a terrible thing. I remember one young man that was in prison in California. Prison, now, this is not jail. He was in prison, and I knew the family. And he got drunk after the family told him many times that he needs to stop drinking and driving. He was doing almost 100 miles an hour on a regular street, not on a highway. He was on a regular city street with lights and everything. And he ran into a young lady who was also intoxicated. His car hit her, and 2 cars flipped. She died instantly. And they charged him with, I forget which degree of murder, vehicular homicide, whatever it was. And he wound up having to leave his wife and his 2 young children for 8 years because of one night of drinking. One thing his wife did tell me that when she went, the first time she went to see him, after she couldn't see him for a few months, she went in to see him, his Bible, from cover to cover, was completely marked up. The time of sobriety and the clarity that he got, he took it, at least he turned to God. That is, because we make mistakes, but God doesn't give up on us, amen? Amen. But it's not necessary to make the mistake. And what has happened is that we've actually moved from alcohol, and now we're legalizing marijuana. Here's the Wall Street Journal. Again, is this a Christian publication? Do they have the health message in the Wall Street Journal? Okay, I want to clarify. This is what they say. Marijuana is more dangerous than you think. As legalization spreads, more Americans are becoming heavy users of cannabis, despite its links to violence and mental illness. Wow. Now, I grew up with a lot of kids who smoke a lot of weed. And there's some of them who to this day have never held a job. And they're in their 40s or 50s and have never had one day in their life held a job because they became such weed heads. I can tell you that marijuana is deceptive. And here's what people aren't talking about in the media and in the popular culture. No one is talking about the fact that we have never studied what happens when you mix alcohol and marijuana. Did you get that? Now, if you remember, somebody else brought you up, but there was a song by Snoop Dogg that once said, "I'm walking down the street, I'm smoking endo, and I'm sipping on gin and juice." Many of our kids are not going to do alcohol or marijuana. They're going to do what? Alcohol and marijuana. And we, to this day, don't miss this. Do not know short-term or long-term effects. You ask what are the long-term effects of COVID infection, or the long-term effects of vaccines. Here's one that we legalize marijuana and no one knows the long-term effects of what's about to happen. I would submit to you that in a country that is poor in managing mental health diseases and illnesses, a country that does not do a good job of it, I want to submit to you that in 10 years, 15 years after all this legalization happens, we are going to have a major mental health crisis in this country. Because I've seen when people come into the jail system, when I worked there for that year, I've seen that we don't have many people with mental health problems. We don't have a good system to do it. So watch this. Chronic marijuana use in higher dosages are found to correlate to greater incidence of psychosis and what else? Schizophrenia. There's a whole campaign now. Marijuana-induced psychosis is real. The science proves it. People must know the risks. The other disease that didn't exist, this is one of the newer diseases since Colorado. When Colorado legalized marijuana, we started to find all these new patterns around marijuana use. One of them was the traffic fatalities went up. Some people argue why that happened, didn't happen. They had some problems with traffic fatalities. But the other thing that they found is that there are people who smoke marijuana and get this. I saw this myself in a patient in California. He was at a community college. He went to a party. Somebody gave him a joint. Now the joint could have been laced. I don't know. Instantaneously, like a snap, he lost his mind. A complete psychosis. And I had to wrestle a guy down, call an ambulance, call the police. He was out of his mind. The same thing happened when I was in medical school in Miami to a kid who did this in Brooklyn, and they had to actually put him in a mental hospital. It was 4 weeks later by the time they figured out how to get him to Miami to his grandmother. When I saw him, he came into the room. I was with a psychiatrist and with another medical student. The kid fell to his knees and began to worship his grandmother who was in the room with us. he pulled out his pants and began to urinate right in front of us. He was completely out of his mind. And I'll never forget, I turned to the psychiatrist and I said, how long is this kid going to be like this? The psychiatrist said, he'll probably never come back from this. Schizophrenia is one of those diseases, and especially if you have a family history. Some of our families, don't raise your hand, but some of our families, as they say in Jamaica, they touch, right? They have a little bit of mental illness that goes back and no one really talks about. There's this person or that person or the other person. If you're from that, if you have that predisposition and you smoke marijuana, it probably rises to the surface. Schizophrenia is a disease you don't want someone to get. Never mind, just the way we have to treat schizophrenia is pretty rough. Marijuana and its legalization is going to cause problems in America. Why is it? The point is particularly significant due to the increase in drug potency. Over the last 2 decades, while the average potency has risen from 3% THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, that's the active ingredient, and that intoxicates you in marijuana, a couple of decades ago to 9% now, there are some samples of weed that measure as high as 25%. This is not the weed that Bob Marley or the hippies in the 60s smoked. It is far more potent. It has been genetically modified, genetically engineered to be more potent. This is why we have another new disease I forgot to mention. That's cannabis-induced hyperemesis syndrome. Have you all heard of this? This is where people smoke weed, and rather than the weed doing the effect that we used to actually prescribe one of its substrates, so we used to give a pill that they took from marijuana to suppress nausea in chemo patients. Right? We used to give that medicine out, and probably still do. So people think, well, if you smoke weed, it'll reduce your nausea. So a lot of cancer patients, a lot of people start smoking weed. What we found is that with these changes in THC and other things, some people start smoking weed and then they can't stop throwing up. I've seen 3 patients like this when I was in California, and even after they've not eaten in days, and they're still retching. We give them Zofran, we give them fluid, we try everything. They just keep retching. Some of them can tear their esophagus. Cannabis-induced hyperemesis syndrome. And a lot of, again, this is not being told. Sanjay Gupta did a special on CNN around medical marijuana. I felt that they failed to warn the American people of what happens when you go from medical marijuana to recreational marijuana. And a lot of medical marijuana is, they're trying to use the whole plant, but there are parts of the plant, and you can separate out the THC. THC is fat soluble. You boil marijuana in plain water, and THC doesn't come out. So if you really find a natural medicinal use for it, you don't have to get intoxicated at the same time. But the point is, we use medical marijuana to normalize it, and now where are we? Recreation. And this will, I believe this is going to ruin a generation of young people. Well, and another thing about marijuana is it works backwards from every other drug. So, why do we say that marijuana is a gateway drug? Have you ever heard that? And a lot of people say that's not true, that can't be true. Here's why it is true, or at least the neurochemistry that supports that thesis. Well, when you look at it, this is the endocannabinoid system, the THC. So in the brain, this is the presynaptic nerve, this is the postsynaptic nerve. In the brain, the neurotransmitters come from the presynaptic side, they travel through the nerve synapse, the space, they plug into the receptors, and a signal is sent. That's how your body sends information around. If we switch this, so there is actually a receptor for this in the brain. If we switch this around and make this dopamine, which is the pleasure neurotransmitter that makes you high, what happens when you smoke marijuana is it doesn't make you release more dopamine like cocaine or meth or even alcohol. It makes your receptors increase on the back end. What that does by making the dopamine receptors on the back end increase, it means that in order for you to get the same amount of satisfaction or pleasure out of an activity, you need more of it. So what happens to schoolwork in a lot of kids? Well, getting an A on a test just doesn't do anything like it used to. So it creates a condition called amotivational syndrome. But if you ever try cocaine, and now you have all these additional dopamine receptors on the back of on the top of the postsynaptic nerve, and now you take cocaine, what does cocaine do? It floods hundreds of times more dopamine than sex or food. It floods the nerves, this part of the brain with dopamine. And guess what happens? You've got all these extra receptors because you've been smoking weed. Cocaine actually feels better than it would have felt. Meaning your threshold for cocaine addiction has done what? It comes down. That's how it works as a gateway drug. America, let me say this clearly. America, war on drugs has failed. Why has the war on drugs in America failed? Because we treat the war on drugs as if we have a drug supply problem. It is not a drug supply problem. It is a drug demand problem. Americans want to get high. So it doesn't matter if you cut off every cartel, posse, dope boy in America. Americans will find something else to get high on. Cough syrup, glue. You know, they make crystal meth. It was Sudafed. We took it when we were kids when we had a cold. People learn how to cook the Sudafed into meth. That's why you got to show your driver's license now to get a Claritin D. We have a drug demand problem. Why do we have a drug demand problem? Because the American population deviated so from God that Americans are existing in a spiritual, emotional vacuum. You see, God, and I learned this doing addiction medicine at a veterans hospital in Loma Linda, California. The veteran would chant, God made the human heart so big, only he can fill it. Did you get that? God made the human heart so big, only he can fill it. If you try and fill a God-sized hole in your heart with weed, with liquor, with sex, with gambling, with pornography, I can go on and on. You will always become addicted because it will never fill the hole. We are a nation that has turned its back on the God of heaven. We don't know God like we used to know. So now we try and find, remember the equation? Stress equals demands minus resources. We get our resources from God, but if you remove God, Satan will give you false resources, like marijuana and alcohol. It's Tuesday at work. Tuesday. And there are people that are like, man, I can't wait till Friday, I need a drink. I can't wait till I can get drunk Friday. Really? The way you get through the week is by hoping and waiting for liquor at the end. So, of course, just to highlight this for a second, the opioid epidemic, 130 people died every day from opioid-related overdose. I think this was in 2018. 47,600 people died from overdosing on opioids. 2 million people had an opioid use disorder in 2018. I mean, you could go on and on. This thing has taken off. Part of the diseases of despair, and the numbers are staggering. Preventable deaths. So, and I talked about this already, so I won't go through it again, but the drugs of abuse, they target the reward centers in the brain. So here's how cocaine works. Y'all like cocaine? All the yellow, the dopamine when cocaine is, this is what food does. So as good and as pleasing as food is, this is why a crackhead, we used to call them crackheads when I was growing up in Miami, this is why they'll stop eating. Because food doesn't do what this does. And here's what the secret is spiritually. Satan figured out how to hijack the reward pathway in the human brain so that he can control people. The reward pathway that God created in man to when you enjoy food, so that in marriage you can enjoy intimacy. The reward pathway he gave that when you go for a long walk and the endorphins are released and the dopamine is released out in the night sunshine, Satan figured out a way to hijack it and turn people into zombies, addicted to these chemical substances. Here's what Isaiah says. Isaiah says, wherefore, Isaiah 55 verse 2, he says, wherefore do you spend money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which satisfies not? Hearken diligently unto me, and eat ye that which is good. When you go out and buy weed and liquor and cocaine and even processed junk food, you're spending money on something that doesn't actually feed you. God says, why are you spending your money on this foolishness? I just want to show you this one more time. The other part of this, I want you to see the statement again. God made the human heart so big, only He can fill it. I never really knew, the only times in my life, I'll say this way, the only times in my life I've known peace is when I've had peace in Christ. The only peace I've ever had is in Christ. And ironically, I've had some of my most peaceful, fulfilling times have been my most turbulent and challenging. But because while I'm in the ship that's in a storm, I tend to rely more on God. So ironically, I find often more peace in the storm. Because in the storm, sometimes that's when I fully turn it over to God. You know, that's why sometimes God keeps sending us storms. All right, the second thing, we're going to move on from the Moses trusted in God to Moses ate the way God prescribed. And I'm going to show you again, this is all of the fancy parts of the ventral tegmental area, the nuclear accumbens, the prefrontal cortex, which is, if your body is the temple of the God, the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex of your brain is the most holy place. This is where the Shekinah glory of God falls. This is where all of that happens. So this is the reward pathway. You see glutamate, GABA. Remember, this is the disinhibiting chemical. But dopamine, this green one here, is the one that makes people high. When they do cocaine, it's dopamine. Probably why they call dope. It's literally dopamine in the brain that is released that gives you the feeling of euphoria. And the food industry figured out how to hijack this, just as the drugs have hijacked it. So the tobacco industry, we didn't talk a lot about nicotine today, but nicotine is as deadly as it ever was, still is, always will be, in the form of cigarette, however you take it in. But the tobacco industry got in trouble because they lied and said, our product is not addicting, it does not cause disease. In fact, if you go back online, you can look up the original billboards. They have old billboards that say things like, Camel cigarettes, good for your anxiety. 4 out of 5 doctors represent Marlboro cigarettes for your cough. You look it up online, it's really expensive. Put some slides on. But the food industry does not lie. They tell you their product is addictive. You know what they say? That you can't eat just one. Once you pop, you can't stop. The food industry does not play. They tell you straight up. This is what we do all day, every day. This is how we make our money. We exploit biological preferences with formulas that maximize 3 components: salt, sugar, and fat. So what do? They manufacture addiction. This is the New York Times. Is this part of our health message? Do these people believe? No. But they say overconsumption of fast food triggers addiction-like neuroaddictive responses. Wow. It manufactures addiction. How do they do it? By making you reach what they call the bliss point. They study just the right amount of salt to make a food release the right amount of dopamine, just the right amount of sugar, just the right amount of fat, and then they combine them. And what I'm learning is that the processed foods are dangerous because of the way they combine sugar and fat. That's literally what makes them so dangerous. So Michael Moss, I've been on a couple panels with him, we interviewed him for one of our shows. He has a book called Salt, Sugar, and Fat. He talks about how it is, you see this? Salt plus fat divided by a satisfying crunch times a pleasing mouthfeel equals a food designed to addict. Doritos, Cheetos. I see kids eating hot Cheetos. Man, let me tell you something. I get little kids coming to me and their hands stained red. I'm like, Mom, were they painting? No, that's the hot Cheetos. But if it stains your hand, what does it do to your stomach? I don't know if I have that slide, but we're seeing more kids coming with significant gastritis because of the corrosive and toxic components that they put in these foods to make it. Remember, this isn't real food. They're creating this in a lab. They're designing it and producing it in a factory. So they have to create this stuff from scratch. And one of the concepts that is really fascinating is this one. It's the concept of the vanishing caloric density from cheese puffs. You pop a cheese puff and you chew it, what do you get initially? Crunch. Your brain says, oh, cucumber, apple, crunch, nutrients are coming. And then what does it do? It melts in your mouth. You ever thought about that? When it melts in your mouth and it goes to your stomach, your brain says, where's the food? It melted in your mouth, it crunks and melted. So what happens? You just keep eating it. You keep eating it and eating and eating. It has no nutritional value. So when it reaches past what we call the break point in the digestive tract, where your body senses nutrients and says, okay, we've got enough nutrients. There's a lot of ways your body senses that it's had enough food. We've had enough nutrients. This goes in and nothing is red. You just keep eating. So how do they do this? Well, they come out. And I don't think I have all of the stuff on this, but they spend millions of dollars advertising this stuff to children. Childhood obesity, don't take it lightly. This doctor is warning families in the hood. Right below it, my kind of shopping spree. The dollar menu, the mom is double fisting bags of McDonald's. In fact, they are equal opportunity. Desayuna, rápido, or $1. I like what they do here. I like this. Me encanto. They like, I'm loving it. They even put that in Spanish. Right? Because they know that certain populations are more primed to eating this food than others. You go into affluent suburbs, how often are they giving their kids McDonald's? You go into poor inner city neighborhoods or poor rural neighborhoods, how often are they going to do it? You get what I'm saying? So the advertising is made to target it. And so what happened? Well, the fast food industry is a $170 billion a year industry. They target low-income communities and clusters in neighborhoods with 30% fewer supermarkets than upscale neighborhoods. So they don't have Whole Foods in these areas. They don't have grocery stores. They create food deserts. There's also a thing called food swamps where they pour in bad calories into these neighborhoods. And this is what causes disease. Is the federal government helpful or harmful? Well, the federal government is hypocritical. This is what the government tells you to eat, right? This is just that little bit of sugar and salt. You see that up there? Just two. The protein, meat, and nuts is just this. Grains, corn, wheats, and oats. You can barely see it up there at all. It's here. Vegetables and fruits over here. Here's what they tell you to eat, all the vegetables and fruits. How much vegetable and fruit do they subsidize? Unless that's vegetable and fruit, which I think that's only sugar and starch. Meat and dairy is what they subsidize. So they tell you to only eat, a small amount of meat and nuts and bean, a little bit of meat, but they subsidize a ton of it. So the government tells you to eat one thing, but it takes our tax dollars and subsidizes something else. The classic example of this goes with some of y'all. I'll take some of y'all back. I'll take you back to your childhood. Government cheese. Some of y'all might remember that government cheese. Boy, that government cheese was some funny stuff. It was like alien cheese. Like you heat it up and it just bubbled. It didn't even matter. It just floated. It was the weirdest stuff. And the government took, I want you to get this, they took the waste from the dairy farms, the part of the milk that they couldn't use, the fat that couldn't be used for anything else. They took it and they scooped it all up and they made it into blocks of cheese. And paid the farmers, the dairy farmers to do this, and then took it and gave it away in WIC programs, food stamp programs, all kind of subsidies like that. It is literally a block of cholesterol, saturated fat, and salt. There's Ronald Reagan holding it up with a smirk on his face as if he had just figured out how to end famine and starvation in the world. And this is not a political party. This is the U.S. government just does this, regardless of who's in power. So you got to be aware. And when you talk about COVID, this is why COVID does so well, because we've subsidized the diseases that are the foods that are pro-inflammatory: sugar, salt, fat, meat, cheese. That's what we subsidize. We make the processed food super cheap. And one preacher said this in a sermon I heard once. He said, your body will conspire to kill you. If you just give yourself everything you want, the body will conspire to kill you. The addict, if they just get enough of the cocaine, that's why, the tragedies like Whitney Houston that, brought tears to my eyes when it happened. The difference between Whitney Houston and someone on the street is Whitney Houston doesn't run out of money. There's no bottom. So eventually, the only bottom is overdose or someone talking them into rehab. If you give your body everything it wants, your body will conspire to kill you. That's why the scripture says, do not lean on the arm of flesh. Walk in the spirit and not in the flesh. That's why the Bible says that. So, what else did Moses have as an advantage when he ate? Well, he understood Leviticus 23 and 25 because he is the author of these books. He says, speak to the people of Israel, God says, you shall eat no fat of ox or sheep or goat. For every person who eats the fat of an animal, of which a food offering may be made to the Lord, shall be cut off from his people. So you're not supposed to eat the fat of an animal. That's one of the things that Moses learned. The other thing in Genesis 9 and Leviticus 17, Genesis 9:4, but flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye what? You're not supposed to eat it. The blood of the animal is not supposed to be eaten. Why? Because when you kill an animal, it goes through its own stress reaction and releases all the stress hormones into the blood. When you eat the blood from the animal, you get the estrogen, you get the cortisol, you get the adrenaline, all that stuff from the animal you get. Leviticus 17:14, for the life of every creature is its blood. Its blood is its life. Therefore I have said to the people of Israel, you shall not eat the blood of any creature. For the life of every creature is its blood. Whoever eats it shall be what? Cut off. So what does the Bible teach? Hold up to what science says. Well, the Bible, of course, if we step back for a second, the Bible gives a whole food plant-based diet in Genesis. Right? From the beginning, it isn't until after the flood that meat is introduced 2,000 years later. Daniel chapter 1, they go on, they eat pulse and water, pulse is lentils and vegetables. So what does the Bible hold up with science? Well, now this is what's come out. Cancer Research UK is reiterating that a group 1 carcinogen means that this is something that causes cancer. This is where cigarettes would go in group 1. What is in there? Salami, bacon, sausage, and hot dogs. Hot dogs. Hot dogs. Why? Well, because they take all kinds of parts of the animal to make a hot dog, number one. But the reason this is so important is we are Kentucky Fried Chicken. I should have put that slide up there too. Kentucky Fried Chicken was one of the big supporters of the Susan Coleman breast cancer. You know, pink, NFL every fall they wear pink for breast cancer research. One of the big organizations is Susan G. Coleman. I hope I'm getting it all right there. And so they teamed up with Kentucky Fried Chicken and made pink boxes with ribbons. Literally giving people fried chicken to help stop cancer. That's like a drug dealer going through the neighborhood with bags that say no to drugs, and inside the bag is crack and weed. No, probably causes cancer, group 2A, pork, beef, and lamb. So instantaneously you see this. Why is meat so dangerous? I'm going to go through this real quick. Remember, we talked about why Moses lived so long. We're also talking about how to beat the pandemic. Well, is iron and steak to blame for the risk of Alzheimer's? Studies suggest excess red meat bad for the brain. What we've learned is that it is heavy metals that causes Alzheimer's. When you eat meat and the blood of the meat, where the hemoglobin in the red blood cells are, your body has no way to stop when it's had enough iron. It just keeps taking the iron from meat. When you get iron from spinach, like Popeye did, when you get iron from spinach, what happens? When your body has enough iron, it stops it. No more iron crosses into your body. The excess iron from red meat crosses into your blood, and the iron settles in your brain. And this is one of the theories they have around why Alzheimer's happens. It's not just iron, it's all heavy metal. We talked about aluminum, even zinc. So now we're in a pandemic, everybody's like popping all these zinc pills. I warn them, if you want to eat your zinc, don't pop your zinc. Because if you take all that zinc, we don't know long term if it will have the same effect like iron does. So that's one of the ways it happens. But we also know it causes fatty acid-mediated hypothalamic inflammation in the brain, which is what ultimately is this inflammation in the brain that causes Alzheimer's, right? Brain fog, reduced cognition. That's what happens. And so we are looking at ways to reverse that. Well, one of the ways you reduce your risk of Alzheimer's and brain fog is to not eat meat. Alzheimer's sufferers, brain inflammation ignites a neuron-killing forest fire. What else does eating meat do? Well, it increases your appetite. I won't get too deep into this, but they now know that when you eat fat, it actually increases your appetite. But more importantly, it actually causes diabetes. Most people don't know sugar is part of why you get diabetes, and it's not because sugar stays in your blood, it's because sugar goes to your liver and it makes fatty acids that then go to your cells. And what happens is this insulin receptor gets plugged up with fat. So this door, it turns the key to open this door, which is where glucose goes into your cell, so that you no longer have glucose in your blood, and you have glucose in your cell. And when you get glucose, which is what you want, not fructose, your body runs on glucose, your brain runs on glucose. When you get glucose into the muscle cell, it uses it either for energy or it stores it as glycogen, right? If it doesn't get into the cell, you have high blood glucose, you have high blood sugar. What is that? That's diabetes. How do you get it? Well, one way is if you eat a lot of sucrose, which is table sugar, which is what's hidden in everything. The two parts of sucrose are glucose and fructose. It's the fructose that goes to your liver, wreaks havoc, and makes you make fat yourself out of your liver that can do this. But on top of that, if you're eating fat, what happens is the fat from that hamburger, the fat from that egg, it goes and clogs this up. Blocks this, your insulin can't get in here to work. You become insulin insensitive, right? And the fat is blocking this, and then what happens? Well, now you can't open this, so sugar can't go in. Most Americans don't know that it is the consumption of processed sugar and fats that cause their diabetes. Here's the good news. If you stop those two things, what happens? This unplugs, you become insulin sensitive again, and sugar can go back in. If you haven't gone too far, you can naturally reverse diabetes. What else can you do? Well, when you exercise, it also makes your body more sensitive to insulin here, so that the sugar goes in, because your body and muscles are craving the energy to do the exercise. So you can actually reverse diabetes. And most people go to the doctor and they test them in their blood sugar. What do? What do most doctors do? They write a prescription for metformin or insulin, and they tell you, be careful with your diet. Because most doctors aren't trained to tell you that in fact, you probably already have everything you need to stop your diabetes. It's all at the grocery store. And the stuff that will keep you in diabetes is also at the grocery store. You get to choose. And most people, if they've suffered from diabetes long enough, will choose to stop. But most people don't even get the choice. They've never been told about this stuff. Well, going back to meat, what else does meat do? It 100 million bacteria per quarter pound of beef. The endotoxins from these bacteria exist even after the meat is cooked or even placed in acid. Saturated fat and meat products help the endotoxins cross the gut wall into the bloodstream, causing inflammation. Even when you cook meat, it does not destroy the endotoxins in the meat. The endotoxins damage the lining of your gut wall, the poisons come across, inflammation happens. It doesn't just inflame your body, like we talked about with COVID last session. It goes to your brain, inflames your brain, and increases your risk for Alzheimer's again. Now, you now start to understand why we have so much dementia in America. The American diet is designed to give you dementia. Never mind, I haven't even touched on the other part of it, which is the multi-infarct dementia, which is what happens when you have high cholesterol levels, you block all the vessels in your brain, and you get these little tiny strokes all your life that don't even register. And over time, those little strokes start to coalesce, and you start to have decreased cognitive function. You never have a big stroke, you just have a bunch of tiny ones that led to dementia. Have you ever worked in I don't know if anybody ever worked on a dementia ward or worked with a dementia patient? It is one of the most heartbreaking things to see. And again, the average American has no idea that there are things they can do to drastically reduce the risk of dementia. Obviously, smoking, drinking, really increases your risk. But a lot of people don't know about some of these other things. Here, did that one. All right, let me skip through some of you already did. So one of the things I wanted to highlight, plant-based diets are linked to less severe illness from COVID-19. This is from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. It doesn't say that if you're plant-based you won't get COVID. It is attached and connected to a lower less severe disease. Why? Because a whole food, plant-based diet. I don't say I'm vegan, and don't say vegan. You say whole food, plant-based. Why? Because you can be vegan and eat Oreos. Oreo cookies are vegan. Right? Perfectly vegan. So you got all the cookies you want and still be a vegan. And we went to Brooklyn. We went to some of the vegan restaurants. I was like, man, this is worse than IHOP's. So what do you want? You need zinc. Why? You need zinc in your diet. Why? Because zinc is critical in your innate immunity and in your adaptive immunity, the two sides of the immune system. Zinc works to help you fight infection. There's a lot of different ways. We'll get into it. When you're zinc deficient, you have immune problems, right? So it's also quercetin. So people they take quercetin supplements and so forth. But the reality is, quercetin you can get from the diet. What does quercetin and zinc do? Quercetin helps open up the cell. It's a zinc ionophore, lets the zinc into the cells so that the cell can do better. So when I find someone who has COVID, to answer the question from last session, I tell people to go on a diet that is rich in zinc and quercetin. If they don't think they can do that, they can take the supplements. You see in most drugstores now they have elderberry supplements. And it's because elderberry is rich in quercetin. That's why they do it. What else is good for this? Curcumin from turmeric. So my family's Jamaican, we like curry. Curry is very good for you. Goat is not so good for you. But the curry is, right? So you get curry with tofu, chickpeas, all that kind of stuff. That is very good for you. Why? The curcumin itself is antiviral, anti-inflammation. It's very, very good for you in these circumstances. What foods are rich in zinc? Beans like garbanzo beans, green vegetables like asparagus and spinach, mushrooms like shiitake and primini, plain white, nuts like I think I remember cashews are very high in it, cut it off. Whole grain foods like raw oats, like steel cutters, high in zinc. So you're eating foods that are rich in quercetin and rich in zinc. You're going to do better if you get COVID than if you don't. This is probably why people eat a more plant-based diet do better. Because they by default, if you eat a plant-based diet, you're more likely to eat spinach, right? Quercetin, anti-inflammatory, antioxidants, and so I won't go back to that, but these are foods rich in quercetin, right? Elderberries are at the top, so you see all those supplements now, red onions, white onions, cranberries. The quercetin is in the red of the skin of the apple, or the green of the pepper, or the red skin of the onion, the green of the kale, the blueberries. All these foods are rich in quercetin. I don't tell people to take supplements. I try to encourage people to eat the food to get the stuff. Because what people do is they take the supplement and then where do they go? They go to make it easy. Don't take my supplement. Mushrooms. A lot of people don't know much about mushrooms. Mushrooms are antiviral. They have a lot of good properties. One of the things mushrooms do, I won't get too deep into it though, is mushrooms are actually good for they're new blood cells. So they fight against the genesis of new blood vessels. And by doing that, they actually make it hard to get cancer. Right? Angiogenesis. The word slipped me thinking. Angiogenesis. So you don't make new blood vessels. So if you don't make new blood vessels, cancer doesn't do well because cancer needs new blood vessels. So does fat. So if you try to lose weight, mushrooms actually help keep you from making new fat cells. Skip through. And of course, the green leafy vegetables, we talked a bit about them. So just as some examples, let me talk about school performance. This is from PS 244Q in New York. It adopted a full vegetarian policy, and as a result, the BMIs, overall weight, have gone down and kids get sick less often. The school's standardized test scores even ranked 11th in the state. You see that? And that's not one of the nicest schools in the state. I should say that's one of the wealthier areas in the state. The 10 other schools with higher test scores have no English language learners, and they all have gifted programs, neither of which applies to PS 244Q. They went vegetarian at the school. I can give you the testimony of a prison. I met the chaplain and some of the other people that worked at the prison, the Maranatha prison in Victorville, California, where they gave the California inmates the option that they could, because a private activist-run prison, they had an option of going to the whole food plant-based arm of the prison or the regular California Department of Corrections. What they found is those who went to the Adventist side and made a whole food plant-based diet, spiritual instruction, their recidivism rate was 2%. Only 2 out of 100 went back to prison. Typically, the recidivism rate is more like 90-something%. They didn't have race-based fighting in the side with the whole food plant-based diet. The gangs weren't like the Mexicans and then the Crips and then the Bloods and then the Aryans and skinheads. Everybody got along. And the state of California shut the prison down. So they didn't pay some phone bills. I can get into why I think that really happened, but I won't. So, a couple of last things and then we'll be done. Vitamin D. So we talked about what else we do to fight COVID. Vitamin D. Vitamin D binds to these cells, the macrophages, the neutrophils, and facilitates gene expression that makes the cells better at killing pathogens. Right? So you need vitamin D. And then here, on the other side of the immune system, the adaptive aspect of the immune system, the alveoli, when the inflammation happens and the cells start, the alveoli, this is where air is supposed to come in and exchange. If it fills up with fluid like this, it can't do it, so you suffocate to death in your own body. That's how these diseases kill you. And there's a cytokine storm we talked about before, right? The inflammation decreases as vitamin D calms the adaptive immune system, cytokine levels drop, and inflammation decreases. So the studies have shown overwhelmingly a correlation. It is not causal, but a correlation between higher vitamin D levels and less severe COVID infection. Right? So this is one of the times I do tell people to take supplements because we live in Connecticut where you have sun for a few months, but most of us work inside, we wear long sleeves, we don't get enough sun at all to get our vitamin D levels up. And in the winter, I go to work, it's dark, I come home, it's dark. So we get no sun at all. So I say at least 5,000 international units a day, so I'm gonna tell you 2,500 to 3,000. What you want to do is go get your vitamin D levels checked. You want them to be up over 50. That's the goal you want to get to. And you want to take enough vitamin D. This is literally one of the most approved things that helps to mitigate against COVID infection. How many times have you heard us talk about on the news? Never. You ever talk about ivermectin? You ever talk about hydroxychloroquine? You ever talk about all that stuff? I've never heard a news program talk about vitamin D. On any side of the argument, well, vitamin D is one of the things that just correlates to less severe disease. I wanted to show you the last couple ones on sugar. This is how your white blood cells are supposed to work. They take the toxin, if this is coronavirus, it takes it in, it destroys it. White blood cells use vitamin C to absorb toxin, and it's ready to start again. If you eat sugar, here's the vitamin C supposed to be 50 times concentration. Right, it's able to destroy the maximum number of vitamins and bacteria when it's 50 times. Sugar also goes into the white blood cell. The vitamin C levels are 13 times the concentration, and it's only able to destroy about 25% as many viruses and bacteria. What I tell people is when you eat a Snickers bar, your white blood cells go to sleep for like 6 to 8 hours. Imagine what happens in a pandemic. Right? So why do people still get it? Because, again, any elevation in blood sugar, just like a diabetics get really bad infections when their blood sugars are high, it happens to anyone who allows it to go way up like that. I think I'm going to end right there. I have some verses at the very end. I think I'll stop here so we can do some more questions because I know an hour is late. But thank you all for sticking around through all this. Any questions?
I just want to say that I was in that prison system. We were not as a prisoner, but as
Sorry, I saw your tattoo.
As a Weimar College students, we went there to sing to the prisoner. Very polite, it was really nice place. And unfortunately, the state shut it down because it worked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the state makes a lot of money off of recidivism.
That's right.
Yep. There's a question
here. Okay, so if I get a vaccine for the COVID, any one of them, and how I react to the vaccine, like a friend of mine, she got vertigo. When I took the vaccine, the second dose, I took it on a Tuesday, I believe, and then on a Wednesday, at about 4, I felt really hot and really tired, and from 5 o'clock to 12 o'clock midnight, I was heart, but I was like knocked out. Will that predict how you will react if you got COVID?
Yes. So the reason the vaccine give people the chills, the shakes, even sometimes low-grade fevers is because your immune system is learning the antigen and responding to it. So if you get a little bit of a response like that, it's predictive that you have mounted an antibody response. So it means that if you get exposed to the actual coronavirus, you'll probably do better against it than if you took 2 doses of the vaccine and never got a response. That's what the study's saying.
You want to have a response.
You want to have some response. Just like little kids, when they get their vaccines, if you get the real virus, you're gonna get a response too. I mean, that's why those are called symptoms. So you're gonna get some response. If you get the virus, you get the virus, whatever you get something, your immune system will respond to it.
Yes, do vaccines change the RNA and DNA?
They do not. They don't have the ability to do that. The DNA is like the vaccine is like a book, and the DNA is like a tree. So you can get a book from the tree, but you can't take the book and change the tree.
So the spike protein doesn't do anything for that?
No, the spike protein is part of the virus. So when you get COVID, you're going to get exposed to the spike protein. Again, like I said before, everybody's going to eventually probably get COVID. Because at some point, we're going to end all of this stuff. And just like the flu every year, it's going to circle the globe. So eventually, you probably will have been exposed to a spike protein if and when you ever actually got COVID. So spike proteins are part of the virus. So at some point, we'll all probably be exposed to that spike protein.
So in vaccines, don't they have heavy metals and something like the fetal or stem cells?
In the COVID vaccine, there are no stem cells, there's no heavy metals.
Other vaccines have that, or this doesn't?
I don't know of any vaccines that still have any heavy metals. They used to have them way back, and they have them all pulled out decades ago. So that's not a part of what's in vaccines today. But if you're talking about a coronavirus vaccine, none of that stuff is there.
So they don't, like my vaccine book says it has all this stuff in it. It has heavy metals and stuff like that.
Not in the coronavirus vaccine. We can talk after I can
Yeah, all right.
show you that that's not in the coronavirus vaccine.
And what about patients when they're getting weakness and shaking and they're getting all these symptoms and it's not really like a cold or something? What about that?
What do you mean from what?
From the COVID,
From the vaccine or from the virus?
well,
You get it from both.
both, I guess.
Yes, you get it from both. But when you get the virus, remember what a virus does is it hijacks you. This is what viruses do. Viruses, in my opinion, are one of the products of sin. Just like thorns came on roses, viruses came in. And viruses don't have intelligence. That's what's scary about it. They simply, all they do is exist to multiply. So when you breathe in, so let's that first patient from San Francisco, wherever they were on the West Coast, brought coronavirus to America. They breathed it in. They breathed in that virus and it went in and it plugged in and it got inside the cells. The virus hijacks the cell's machinery and makes more virus. And so as you make more virus, your immune system says, wait a minute, where did this thing come from? Your body starts to make a response to it to try and stop it. Because if your body's thinking, if I don't stop it, it's going to take over and it'll kill us. Which some viruses, like Ebola, will absolutely kill you every single time. And coronavirus can as well. So your body mounts a response, and part of that is a fever, right? When you raise your temperature, bacteria and viruses don't do well when your body's temperature is raised. So God made us able to have a fever. You make antibodies to it, right? And when you get the fever, of course, you get chills because you got to make energy. You feel your sense of temperature changes because you're warmer, everything else feels cooler. There's a whole cascade of things that happen when you're exposed to any virus. That virus gets in your body and is trying to make more and more virus. Then what it wants to do, because the virus doesn't really want to kill you, it wants you to get sick enough to get it into your mucous passages so that you sneeze and cough the virus out. Why does it want you to do that? Because then you give it to another host, gets the virus, and the same thing happens all over again, and the virus circulates the globe. That's what the virus wants to do. So it is natural to get a response. So most vaccines, because if you go all the way through the history of vaccines, they're either attenuated where they kill the virus and they put it in you, or they weaken it and put it in you, or they take a piece of it and put it in you. However they make the vaccine, the body still has to have some of that response, so that when you get the real virus, or the full virus, you have an immune system as memory. It says, well, I know what this is, slaps an antibody on it, fights it, destroys it, and you don't get sick. That's the way it works.
But other vaccines, haven't they covered up like, what other vaccines have done, like to be something like, all the lawsuits and everything?
And we should talk offline, but I don't want to just talk about, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, so I don't want to get into like a long discussion around vaccines, because I'm hoping this is another discussion with some of the other relevant information that we presented.
Any other questions?
A lot of those elderberry supplements have zinc in them. What's a good amount of zinc you should have a day? Like me and my family will take an elderberry with zinc if we went out one day where a lot of people, just in case. We don't take it every day.
I think that's perfectly fine. And I have to really look up what those, if somebody else knows how much zinc to take a day. My goal instead is to try and eat a whole bunch of zinc-rich foods. But we do have elderberries. We have the supplements on the kitchen counter. I found them have a lot of sugar. The one we got had a lot of sugar in the red bottle. I'm not taking it anymore. But if you take it once in a while, I don't know that it does any harm. I can't say it does any good either, but I don't think it would do any harm once in a while. And what I'm finding is I have patients who are taking significant amounts of zinc daily and have been doing so, for months and months and months and months. We just don't, like I said, I don't know. I would worry that, as a heavy metal, it could cause problems down the road.
I have a question back here.
So Dr. Dudley mentioned zinc in terms of milligrams, and there have been studies that have indicated that if we consume, and I would not consume, I totally agree with you, I would not consume a lot of heavy metals long term. But we are in a COVID society, if you will. And so we want to do what we can. What is one of the food items that we can have highest for zinc? Does anyone know? It's pumpkin seeds.
Yeah.
You will have to consume a lot of these foods to get a daily requirement of like 25 milligrams. He suggests 50 milligrams. The problem with zinc is that it may cause loose stools, and so you want to take it with food. But I totally agree with the doctor. Food-based diet is the best diet, but sometimes we don't have enough of what we need, and we have to supplement. So if I'm around somebody that has been exposed to COVID, I will take a zinc, at 25 milligrams of zinc, and I will use quercetin as well, because quercetin gets deeper into the cells. And if you remember, President Trump took hydroxychloroquine, and he took also a supplement as well, quercetin. And so that, I think, countered what he had, but.
He also got monoclonal antibodies and stuff too. He got like.
You're right.
He got like.
You're right. Yes.
Trump was smart. He came out there looking strong, but I'm sure he didn't look so strong in the hospital.
Amen. Amen.
Any other question?
I have a good question, actually. You mentioned marijuana, and I have a neighbor he's taking a CBD. Can you talk about that? Because I noticed in the whole food store there's
CBD supplementation.
Yes.
Yeah, CBD by itself isn't the intoxicating component of marijuana. The only problem as a doctor have with CBD is the FDA doesn't regulate it. So what they have found is that there is THC in some of the CBD products. That's the challenge. So if you can be sure you have a product that doesn't have the THC in it, then that's probably going to be a lot better.
And what are the benefits of taking CBD? Because he does it for his joints.
Yeah, people claim all kinds of benefits of CBD. I'm still waiting for some more research to come out on it, but people take it for all kinds of things. Everything from just like general mental wellness to arthritis to all kinds of stuff that CBD take it for.
Okay. Yes, I want to thank you for being here today.
family heard you at the youth Bible boot camp, and my daughter actually wanted Miss Gymnastics to hear you, so thank you. So my question is, the things that you just shared are wonderful, and these are some of the things that we've been sharing, some of them, with people throughout the pandemic, but that's just as medical missionaries. So to what degree are you permitted to share this information with your patients?
I do it with every patient.
You do with every.
Listen, I sit patients down, when I diagnose them with COVID, I sit down and I talk to them about what a pro-inflammatory diet is. I talk to them about the foods they need to immediately stop eating, dairy, meat, and processed foods. I talk to them about what foods they need to start immediately eating. I often do, now in those cases, I will tell them, listen, you should go get vitamin D and start taking it. A lot of them will take vitamin C. But COVID, the correlation is stronger with vitamin D and with vitamin C in terms of benefit. These are the people I will tell them, go get an elderberry supplement and take it. It usually does come with zinc, like you said. So you can take it, but eat these foods, stay hydrated, and I tell them, no matter how you feel, get outside and walk 15 minutes, even if it's just 15 minutes at a time in the sun. Try and do that 3 or 4 times a day if you can do it. And I say that because if you use the lungs will be more able to survive the onslaught that COVID is going to give it, right? But if you sit at home like we tell you, like most doctors tell you, go home, hide in your house, watch Netflix, eat ice cream, and you'll come out of it 10 days later better. So don't do that. Because that alone, between the mental health problems it causes just sitting at home for 10 days straight, it will cause you problems. Now, don't go around people, but go out in your neighborhood, drive to a park, and go out and walk. Because walking all by itself boosts the immune system. And as you breathe, you're breathing out virus, right? You're breathing out some of the stuff that's actually trying to take you down. So walk briskly as you can and try and get the stuff out. So actually, I've had patients come back and thank me because they've done better than the other people at their job that got the COVID at the same time and didn't see me as a doctor. So that's all I do. And I don't go into what's not proven. I try and stay inside proven science. So I don't give ivermectin and I don't do that. Not that if it works, it works. It doesn't work. But there's no hydroxychloroquine. The studies just aren't there yet. There are more coming, so we may change our perspective. The monoclonal antibodies, overwhelming. Steroids, if you wind up in a hospital and are super sick, absolutely overwhelming. The evidence shows that it works. But that's not who I see. I see people that are not that sick yet. To your point earlier about what do you do early in the process, these are the things that you do early in the process and staying connected to people. I'll tell you, I had a Catholic priest as a patient. He was actually not a priest yet. He was in the seminary. He was a Catholic, one of our clinics. There's a seminary nearby. He was in the seminary. This was in Cheshire, in our Cheshire Seminary. And he and I had the longest discussion about trusting in Jesus. And what trust in God will do to fight disease. Quoting scripture, and he lit up like a Christmas tree because we were able to talk Bible. He's in the seminary, so he still believes the Bible. In a few years as a priest, he might not. But right now, he is still in the Bible, and we were just going at it. It was the most beautiful experience, myself and this Catholic priest, around how trusting in God helps with fighting disease. And I love, that's why one thing I love about medicine. As much as I love preaching, I love the fact that people come to me and I'm able to share the gospel with them, share the health message with them, share the love of God with them. So many people are hurting and broken, more than we even imagine. Young people, teenagers, I'm talking to them and they're broken. Young girls who literally will just give themselves away. And you get a chance to sit and speak to them how priceless they are, how God sees them. And I've seen the light bulb go on in some of those young people's heads that, wait a minute, maybe I'm not worthless. Maybe I do have value. You know what I'm saying? That's the beauty of what we do when we do medical missionary work in any form. And all of us as Christians, we have the opportunity to do it. The discussions around the vaccine, as interesting as they are, the vaccine this whole thing is going to pass. By next summer, no one's going to be talking about vaccine because either everyone will have it or they do what, it'll move on. What's not going to change is that it is lifestyle. It is trust in God that is really going to protect people from disease and despair, which is really what we're seeing.
So when you showed the chart in the first presentation about the pre-existing conditions, diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease and everything that makes COVID so, dangerous, I guess. that to me turns on a light as an Adventist, like, here's an opportunity for us. Because we have our health message, which addresses many of those things. My question is, what would you suggest?
Can you find it for me, that slide?
Which one?
It's, it was slide number 20.
So, here in Connecticut, I noticed we don't have a lot of doctors, that join in with our medical missionaries tend to just be volunteers. And so what would you suggest for us as a church to be able to make more of an impact in reducing these conditions? Because sometimes the medical missionary work or the health message in our church is kind of looked at a little bit fringy. But I do see that we can really make an impact with these conditions.
That is a phenomenal question. It's something I actually go to conferences and talk about. So I was the director of the health department for the city of Pasadena. And in that process, I learned a lot about community engagement around health. So if the Seventh-day Adventist Church to me was to really fully step up, what we would do is, first of all, every church or a group of churches would have a community garden. So imagine if we had community gardens all summer that we could then give to people who, for whatever reason, couldn't get the vegetables or didn't know how to grow vegetables. And we taught people how to just in their, even on their porch, grow certain things, sprout certain things, if we had that kind of capacity. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is we would have farmers markets. So we would come up with a way to create farmers markets that went all over the state of Connecticut. So in a 6-week rotation, these farmers markets would hit Faith Church on Woodland Avenue in Hartford. Then it would hit maybe the church CVAC in South Windsor. Then maybe it would come out here one week. And you would have a food truck that brought fresh produce to the churches that we could sell for a very affordable price in our local communities. And then once we had that, we would then have the cooking classes that would show people how to take these vegetables and fruits they may have never heard of and turn them into meals, into tasty meals. How to season it without tons of salt and without processed stuff and sugars and so forth. That would be the other thing to do. I would argue that we would also do things like exercise classes and walking groups. Like we used to have a group called the Lopers at Loma Linda University, and we all go walking Sunday mornings, and people train for the LA Marathon that way. So we would have programming like that. And every church ongoing would have ways to engage the community. So, and you'd step back from it being an evangelistic meeting. And what you'd say is, we want to reverse diabetes. Do you have diabetes and want to know how to naturally reverse it? And you would have powerful programming about reversing diabetes, reversing hypertension, and those types of things. People in the community would come out, but not just that. If I had my druthers, we would have things that would help strengthen relationships, marriages, how to be a better parent, all that stuff. All that stress from parenting and marriages, that can also cause disease if it's not going well. So all of those types of things are the things that we would do.
I just want to say thank you for sharing. I haven't seen you since you were a little boy. I'm a child of faith church, and I don't know if you remember the Anderson family.
I sure do.
And I remember your mom, Carmen.
Yeah.
So I just thank you. I'm really happy that you shared this good news with us. My sister Linda is a dean of freshman girls at Oakwood College, and she is currently, she held off with getting the vaccine, and she made it through the year last year, even though multiple students were testing positive for COVID, because kids don't listen and freshmen don't listen at all. And this year, when they opened up full force, it is even worse with the Delta variant. So I just mine is more of a testimony. She basically did a lot of the things you said, like she thought she was gonna die, really, because, she did get the vaccine, by the way, about 2 months prior to her getting COVID. But there were girls all around her, just with COVID everywhere. It's in Alabama, and they don't have a lot of good guidelines. But the children all around her had COVID, so she ended up getting COVID. But she did, like, she's probably gonna have a testimony in her sermons regarding COVID. She did all of the things that you're saying, and like even on her third day, she's like, I have my Fitbit on, I'm walking 7,000 mile steps today. She said, I don't feel like doing it at all. She said, but I gotta do it, I gotta keep moving, and she just like increased her fluids and increased the vitamin D and ate lots of fruits and vegetables. People were blending, drinks of onions and oranges and fresh vegetables and delivering it to her, like leaving it on her doorstep. So, God is in control, God is good, and following the health message has kept her and spared her. So she doesn't like a lot of people to know, but she did give me permission to say that. So this is proven and it's true, and I think that we have a testimony and we can be a witness that doing it God's way, you can get better and you can have success.
Amen. Amen. And I'll go ahead. Okay.
No, make your statement.
No, go ahead. I'm taking the closest so you can say that.
I didn't have a question, but I had a statement. Excellent presentation. Brother Shaheen and I and Tom, we normally have these conversations in our Saturday sessions. And you all should be proud. I moved here from South Carolina, which was one of the top states with obesity. And right now COVID is running rampant there. Upon moving here and looking at the state, because I had no clue of where I was coming, but the governor in the statement of Connecticut said the livelihood of the citizens depends upon, the government here. So they take pride in the citizens, in your health. So you should feel proud to be in a state that takes your livelihood and your health at heart. There's not a lot of fast foods around. Back home, every corner, like you presented in your presentation, we have McDonald's, Pizza Hut, everything, every corner. So people cook less. I would just encourage you all to continue your mission of enlightening the community and enforcing and encouraging people to, presume a plant-based diet and focus on their health, because that is what's needed. Back home, we didn't have that education. It's like you were a product of your environment, basically. So you kind of perform with the norm. So be proud of Connecticut and be thankful.
Like I said,
And the 7 years.
I want to close. You mentioned my mom. Anybody that listens to my sermons, my mother died of multiple myeloma, bone marrow cancer in her 50s. That was a very painful disease for her to have, of course. When you have multiple myeloma, every bone in your body breaks. The cancer breaks through the marrow, so she has pain from the crown of her head to the soles of her feet. It was one of the most agonizing things to watch 3.5 years of her having that disease, and then for her to die. It was incredibly painful. I tell you that to say that one of the big parts of the health message for me, besides the fact, that we want to live longer and we want to be stronger like Moses was, is that at the end of the day, we want the character of Christ. One of the reasons I pull back from a lot of the debates that are happening now is because I believe the church is in the phase where Jesus is as our high priest, is in the most holy place. And when he's in the most holy place, he is dealing with sin once and for all. That's what we believe as Adventists. That's our message. That's the sanctuary message. That's what we believe. And as he deals with sin in the most holy place, sin is to be removed from the people. If you read in the book of Numbers, that's literally what happens as the priest is in the most holy place. One of the reasons that this message, the health message, is so important is because we are looking for every advantage over temptation and sin. That's why this is so important. That's why alcohol, caffeine, even though to the world might be like, why are you making such a big deal out of this? Because we, as the soldiers in the army of the living God, are looking for every advantage to have the clearest mind possible, so that we will continuously, moment by moment, hour by hour, day by day, choose God. And the reason many are going to be lost because they don't, that clarity is going to be, that's it. That's why I started off with the story of Jesus in the temple. As he walked away, what did he say? Do not be deceived. Do not be planed. Do not be led away. We follow this message and this mission first and foremost for the clarity to be the Christians Christ wants us to be. Amen?
Amen.